I caught my son-in-law claiming I was unwell at the bank, not knowing I was there. My name is Margaret Collins. And let me tell you something, betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it lives in your own family. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The day began like any other. At 62, my mornings were quiet, marked by the steady rhythm of routine, a cup of coffee by the window, the hum of birds outside the folded newspaper waiting for me on the porch. I no longer lived in the fast lane. Retirement from my years as a school principal had slowed me down, and I had learned to find joy in the simple cadence of ordinary life. But that morning, something unsettled me. My daughter Julia had called the night before, reminding me to let her husband Daniel help with any errands. The way she said it, almost rehearsed, scratched at the edges of my mind. I brushed it off then. But when I found an old letter from the bank about updating a security pin, I decided stubbornly perhaps that I would go myself. I didn't need anyone helping me. The bank was only a few blocks away, a brick building with wide glass doors that reflected the August sun. I walked there at my own pace, handbag tucked under my arm, determination in my step. I didn't expect drama. I didn't expect betrayal. I just wanted to confirm a number, sign a paper, and get on with my day. But life doesn't ask what we expect, it simply happens. The moment I stepped through the doors, I noticed a familiar voice. I froze. My ears sharpened like a hound catching a scent. That voice, low yet confident, laced with a false charm, it was Daniel's, my son-in-law. I had not told anyone I was going to the bank that morning. What was he doing here? I didn't step into view. Instead, I lingered near the potted plant by the entrance, pretending to search through my handbag. My heart gave a slow, uneasy thud when I realized he was standing at the teller's desk. And then I heard it. "She's not well, you see," he told the teller, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. "My mother-in-law's mind isn't as sharp these days. Doctor says she forgets things. I'm just trying to make sure her finances don't slip away from her." My blood turned cold. I felt my face flush, not from shame, but from rage. I wasn't sick. I wasn't confused. My memory was sharp enough to recall every face I'd taught in my decades at school. This wasn't just a lie, it was a calculated attempt to undermine me. Daniel leaned closer to the teller. "She really shouldn't be managing her own money anymore. That's why I'm here, to make sure things are handled properly." I gripped the strap of my handbag so tightly that my knuckles ached. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. The teller, a young woman with glasses perched on her nose, shifted uncomfortably. "Do you have documentation, sir? Something from her doctor? Or legal papers showing power of attorney?" Daniel chuckled, that sly, confident chuckle that had always grated on me. "Oh, those will come soon. But for now, just small adjustments, withdrawals, you know. She won't notice." That sentence, "she won't notice," dug into my chest like a knife. I did notice. I was standing 10 feet away, and I noticed every single poisonous word. For a moment, I considered stepping out, calling his name, confronting him right there in the middle of the bank. But instinct told me to wait, to listen. Sometimes silence is more powerful than outrage, so I stayed hidden, watching him through the reflection of the glass partition. He looked so composed, so assured, as if the world would always bend to his will, as if I were just a frail old woman too weak to speak for herself. And in that instant, I realized something chilling. This was not the first time Daniel had tried this. His ease, his confidence, his practiced lies, they didn't bloom overnight. A thought thundered in my mind. How many times has he come here spinning tales about my health, my supposed incompetence? How much has he already stolen under the pretense of protecting me? The teller's hesitation gave me a flicker of hope. She wasn't fully convinced, but she didn't outright refuse him either. And I knew hesitation could be dangerous. I pressed myself back against the wall, my mind racing. The betrayal was clear. What remained unclear was the depth of it, and whether Julia, my daughter, was aware of her husband's treachery. I wanted to scream. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, adjusted my blouse, and quietly slipped into the row of waiting chairs. I would not reveal myself, not yet. Daniel eventually finished his conversation, walking out with a self-satisfied air as if the world owed him trust. He didn't see me. He didn't even think to look. And that was his first mistake. Because now I wasn't just his mother-in-law. I was his witness. And witnesses don't forget. Daniel left the bank with the air of a man who believed he had won. His shoulders were squared, his gait confident, his mouth curved into that little smirk I had always mistrusted, but never had reason to challenge until now. I remained seated for a moment, watching his reflection disappear beyond the glass doors. Only then did I rise, taking slow, measured steps toward the teller's desk. My heart was still pounding from what I had just witnessed. The young teller looked up, startled. I could see the confusion flicker across her face. Did she recognize the name that man had given? Did she connect it with the woman now standing in front of her? "Good morning," I said softly, steadying my voice, though my insides were aflame. "My name is Margaret Collins." Her mouth parted slightly. I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Collins," she said, shifting nervously. "How can I help you today? I'd like to confirm something." I leaned forward just a little, lowering my voice the way Daniel had. "The man who was just here. What did he say about me?" The teller hesitated. I don't know if I'm supposed to." "I heard him," I interrupted gently but firmly. "Every word." "Don't worry, you won't get in trouble for telling me the truth." Her shoulders eased the tiniest bit. "He said you weren't well. That your memory isn't reliable anymore." My jaw tightened. "And did he ask for access to my accounts?" She nodded cautiously. "Yes. He implied he was handling things for you. I asked for legal documents, but he said those would come soon." "Did he manage to withdraw anything?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Not this time. Not this time." Those words struck me like a hammer. They suggested there might have been a last time. Or several. I exhaled slowly, masking the storm raging inside me. "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing by not giving him anything today." I walked out of the bank, the heat of the late morning sun wrapping around me, though I felt cold inside. Each step toward home was heavy, burdened with thoughts I didn't want to admit. Daniel wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to erase me. Not literally, but financially, socially erasing my credibility, my independence. If the bank believed I was unfit to manage my affairs, then the legal system would follow. And once that perception took hold, it would be nearly impossible to undo. And worst of all, he was doing it behind my back. When I reached home, Julia was in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup. The scent of chicken broth filled the air, warm and comforting, but it did nothing to soothe me. "You're home early," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Yes," I replied, placing my bag on the table. "I had a little errand." She smiled faintly. "I hope you let Daniel help. He's good with these things." I studied her profile as she worked her brow smooth, her lips relaxed. She looked sincere, but sincerity could be innocence or complicity. My stomach twisted. Did she know what her husband was doing? I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I said, "Do you really think I need so much help these days?" "Julia." She paused, the spoon hovering above the pot. Then she chuckled lightly. "Mom, don't take it the wrong way. Daniel just worries. You've always handled things, but you're not young anymore. Maybe it's time to let someone else take over." The casual cruelty of her words burned hotter than the soup. "You're not young anymore," as though age alone were proof of weakness. I swallowed the hurt. "And you trust him to handle everything for me." She finally turned, meeting my eyes with a hint of defensiveness. "Of course I do. He's my husband." There it was, the wall between us. She trusted him blindly. She loved him enough to believe his lies. I forced a smile, though inside I was trembling. I see. That night at dinner, Daniel was unusually cheerful. He carved the roast with exaggerated flourish, telling some story about a colleague at work. Julia laughed. I sat there quietly watching him. The smugness in his eyes was unmistakable. He thought he had me fooled. And maybe for years he had. But not anymore. As I carried my plate to the sink, I caught him watching me with a faint smirk as though daring me to challenge him. That was when I decided I would not confront him yet. I would watch. I would gather proof. If Daniel wanted to paint me as weak, I would show him what true strength looked like: silent, patient, and devastating. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table, the newspaper spread before me but unread. My hands rested on the edges of the pages, steady but tense. Across from me, Daniel scrolled on his phone, one leg crossed casually over the other, as if he hadn't tried to convince the bank yesterday that I was unfit to manage my own money. Julia flitted in and out of the kitchen, humming, preparing lunches for the day. To her, it was just another morning. To me, it was a battlefield disguised in the comfort of domesticity. "Sleep well?" Margaret Daniel asked without looking up from his phone. "Well enough," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He nodded, lips curling slightly. That smirk again. He thought he was in control. He thought his little performance at the bank had gone unnoticed. But I had been there. I had heard everything. I studied him carefully. Daniel wasn't careless by nature. He was the kind of man who plotted quietly, who laid groundwork long before anyone noticed the cracks in the foundation. That was what frightened me most. How long had he been at this? How many lies had he already planted? How many seeds already growing behind my back? After Julia left for work, Daniel lingered. He poured himself another cup of coffee, moving with unhurried ease. Then, almost too casually, he asked, "Do you need me to run any errands for you today?" "Bank groceries." My heart thudded, but I forced a smile. "No, thank you. I can manage." His eyes flicked up to mine just for a second, and in that brief glance I saw an annoyance. He didn't like that I was refusing his help. His plan required me to step aside, to surrender control willingly, but I wasn't ready to do that, not ever. The silence stretched. Finally, he shrugged down to the last of his coffee and left the house. I sat alone, staring at the clock on the wall, listening to the tick-tock of time passing. I could almost hear my own breath, shallow and quick. I knew I couldn't simply react. Reacting would give him power. No, I needed to act deliberately, to learn, to see the full shape of his deception before striking back. That afternoon, I returned to the bank. The same teller recognized me immediately. Her face softened with concern. "Mrs. Collins," she said quietly, "I hope everything's all right." I leaned on the counter, slightly lowering my voice. "Has that man been here before? My son-in-law Daniel?" She hesitated, glancing around before leaning closer. "Yes. Several times, actually." My stomach dropped. What did he want? Always the same thing, she whispered. "He insists you're not well, that he needs to handle withdrawals. He tries different tellers, hoping someone won't ask too many questions." The betrayal deepened with every word. He hadn't just lied once. He had rehearsed this, perfected it. He had been attempting to strip me of my independence piece by piece. "Has he succeeded?" I asked, my throat dry. The teller bit her lip. "I can't share account details without authorization, but if I were you, I'd check your statements carefully." I thanked her and left, my pulse racing. Back home, I pulled out old envelopes, monthly statements I had tucked into a drawer without much thought. My fingers shook as I flipped through them. And there it was, small, consistent withdrawals. Not large enough to raise alarms, but enough to bleed over time. Anger surged through me, hot and bitter. This was my money, my life savings built from decades of work. Every dollar represented the sacrifices I'd made, the long hours at school, the nights spent grading papers, the retirement I had carefully planned. And Daniel had been siphoning it away, drop by drop. I pressed my hand to my chest, willing myself to breathe. Later that evening at dinner, I sat across from him again. He looked so smug, so sure of himself. Julia laughed at one of his stories, completely oblivious. He glanced at me, his smirk barely concealed, as if daring me to speak. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I smiled faintly, nodding along, pretending to be the foolish old woman he believed me to be. All the while, my mind sharpened like a blade. I was no longer simply his mother-in-law. I was his silent witness. And I had learned long ago, as a teacher, as a mother, as a woman who had survived her share of trials, that silence can be the most powerful weapon. It allows you to observe, to gather, to prepare. Daniel thought he was ahead of me. But really, he had just given me the one thing I needed most: knowledge. And knowledge, when wielded properly, becomes power. As I cleared the dishes, my thoughts swirled with plans. I would not rush. I would not stumble. I would let him believe he was winning right up until the moment I took everything back. Because if Daniel wanted to paint me as unwell, he was about to discover just how sharp, how deliberate, and how dangerous my mind still was. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The following days passed in a haze of ordinary routines, but underneath everything felt different. Every conversation with Julia, every glance at Daniel carried an undercurrent of suspicion. I moved through the house like an actor on stage, my lines rehearsed, my expressions carefully chosen, all while the truth pressed against my ribs like a secret begging to be freed. I needed to know how far Julia was involved. Did she suspect? Or was she so blind with love for Daniel that she couldn't see the danger standing in front of her? One evening, as Julia and I sat together in the living room folding laundry, I decided to test her. The hum of the dryer filled the silence as I picked up one of Daniel's shirts, folding it neatly. "Julia," I said casually, "have you noticed how Daniel's been so eager to handle things for me lately?" She looked up, a small crease forming between her brows. "What do you mean?" I shrugged lightly, folding another shirt. "He's offered to go to the bank, pay my bills, even manage my mail. It almost feels like he doesn't trust me to do it myself." Her lips pressed together, defensive already. "He's just trying to help Mom. He doesn't want you stressed." I tilted my head, meeting her eyes. "Do you think I'm incapable of managing my own affairs?" Julia hesitated, fumbling with a towel in her hands. "No, of course not. But you're older now. Everyone needs a little help eventually." There it was again, the quiet dismissal, the suggestion that age equaled weakness. My chest tightened, but I forced a gentle laugh. "Help is one thing, Julia. Taking over is another." Her eyes flickered. Daniel wouldn't do that. Wouldn't he? The image of him at the bank flashed in my mind, his voice dripping with false concern as he claimed I was unwell. I folded the last piece of laundry and set it aside. "I hope you're right," I said softly. My words laced with meaning I didn't dare explain. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The shadows stretched long across the walls and my thoughts raced. Julia's defensiveness had unsettled me. She wasn't malicious, I knew that, but love can blind people to the ugliest truths. If Daniel's poison had seeped into her trust, then exposing him would shatter her world. The next morning, I found Daniel in the kitchen sipping coffee and scrolling his phone again. His eyes met mine briefly, and I decided to push him just slightly. "Daniel," I said, keeping my tone light, "Julia mentioned you've been helping with finances. That's very generous of you." He smiled smoothly. "Well, someone has to look out for you, Margaret. We all want what's best for you." I raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you think is best for me?" His smile faltered for half a second before returning. "To not worry about things you don't need to. You should be relaxing. Enjoying life. Enjoying life while someone else handles my money? I asked. His eyes narrowed just slightly before he forced another smile. You make it sound sinister. I chuckled softly. I suppose I do. He turned back to his phone, but I caught the flicker of irritation in his expression. He didn't like my questions. He didn't like me probing. Good. Later that week, I visited the bank again. This time, I spoke with the branch manager. He was an older man graying at the temples with kind eyes that seemed to understand more than he said. Mrs. Collins, he said, leaning forward over his desk, I've been made aware of your concerns. We've had incidents with your son-in-law trying to access your accounts. Please know we've not allowed him, but his persistence is troubling. Has he taken anything already? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The manager hesitated. There have been some withdrawals. Small, but consistent. Under your name. The signatures. He tapped the file. They don't match perfectly. My stomach churned. Forgery. He had been bold enough to forge my hand. Can you provide me copies of those I asked? The manager nodded. We'll prepare them for you. I left the bank clutching a folder that felt heavier than stone. Inside lay the proof I had feared but needed. That evening, as I sat at my desk flipping through the photocopies, the truth stared back at me in black ink. My name scrawled across checks and slips, shaky and inconsistent. Daniel's attempt to mimic my hand. Anger simmered in my chest, hot and dangerous. He wasn't just lying about me. He was stealing from me. Piece by piece, he was trying to strip away not only my money but my dignity, my very identity. I closed the folder, my hands trembling. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, not until I knew Julia's heart. If she chose to side with him blindly, I needed to be prepared for the possibility of losing her too. But one thing was certain: I would not let Daniel continue. He thought he was the puppeteer pulling strings while I danced obliviously. But he was wrong. I had been watching. I had been listening. And now I was preparing. Dinner that evening felt like a theater performance where only one actor knew the script. Julia moved around the kitchen, cheerful and unknowing, while Daniel sat at the head of the table carving the roast chicken with an ease that made my stomach tighten. I took my usual seat across from him, hands folded neatly in my lap, my face carefully composed. On the surface, I looked like the retired mother and mother-in-law who had nothing to worry about. But inside, the storm raged quietly. As Daniel served the meat onto our plates, he glanced at me with that same smug smile. I went by the bank today, he said, casual, as if discussing the weather. Handled a few things. You won't have to worry about it, Margaret. Julia beamed at him. See, isn't he wonderful, Mom? Always looking out for you. My fork hovered above my plate. I forced a smile, my voice calm. Yes, very considerate. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs. He was testing me, baiting me, seeing if I would reveal that I knew. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not yet. The meal continued with light chatter, Julia describing her day at the office, Daniel making sarcastic little jokes that made her laugh. I nodded at the right times, but I wasn't really there. I was somewhere deeper, cataloging every word, every glance, every smug flicker across Daniel's face. He thought I was blind. He thought I was too old, too frail, too trusting to recognize what he was doing. But I was watching. Always watching. When Julia excused herself to take a phone call, Daniel and I were left alone at the table. The silence was thick, like a curtain drawn between us. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a lazy sort of confidence. You know, Margaret, he said, his voice low, it must be exhausting keeping track of all these details at your age. Maybe you should just let go of some of it. I tilted my head slightly, my lips curving in a faint smile. Let go of what exactly? He shrugged. The bills, the accounts, everything. Why not let someone younger handle it? Someone who cares about you. His words slithered into the air like smoke. I met his gaze, unflinching. And you think that someone is you? The smirk deepened. Of course. Who else? I laughed softly, shaking my head. You're very sure of yourself, Daniel. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Confidence, Margaret. It's not a crime. No. I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. But theft is. For just a split second his mask slipped. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and then he recovered, laughing as though I had made a joke. You're funny, he said, waving his hand dismissively. You should relax more. Julia returned at that moment, and the tension dissolved back into the charade of normalcy. But I had seen it, that flicker of panic, that sharp twist in his eyes. He knew I was not as blind as he wanted me to be. Later that night, as I washed the dishes, Julia came to stand beside me, drying them with a towel. Mom, she said, you don't have to worry so much. Daniel really does care about you. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. I know he does. I lied, the words heavy on my tongue. She smiled, satisfied, and returned to the living room. I stood at the sink for a long time after she left, staring at the soapy water, my reflection rippling in its surface. Daniel thought he had me cornered, but he didn't know the years I had spent as a school principal, the countless times I had dealt with manipulative parents, cunning students, and subtle power struggles. I had learned to recognize deceit long before he entered our lives. I dried my hands, straightened my shoulders, and looked into the mirror above the sink. Not this time, I whispered to myself. You won't win this time. From that moment, I knew I had to be deliberate, careful, patient. A confrontation too early would only give him ground to twist the narrative, perhaps even convince Julia I was paranoid or confused. But if I waited, if I gathered enough evidence, if I set the stage correctly, then his downfall would be undeniable. And when that moment came, I wouldn't just protect myself. I would protect Julia too, even if it meant breaking her heart in the process. The next morning, Julia came into the kitchen as I was pouring myself a cup of tea. The soft clink of her wedding ring against the counter as she reached for a glass caught my attention. It seemed symbolic somehow, a reminder of the chain that tied her to Daniel, the man weaving webs around us both. I studied her quietly while stirring honey into my cup. She looked tired. Perhaps it was just work, or perhaps it was the weight of carrying loyalty to a husband she thought she knew. Julia, I began, my tone casual. Do you think Daniel enjoys taking on so many responsibilities? She glanced at me, eyebrows lifted. What do you mean? Well, I said. Leaning against the counter, he seems very eager to help me with the bank, the bills, even errands. It's almost as if he's trying to take everything off my shoulders. She smiled faintly. That's just who he is, Mom. He likes to be in control of things. He says it keeps him from worrying. In control. The phrase rang in my ears. I sipped my tea. And you trust him completely with that? Her smile wavered. Of course I do. He's my husband. I placed my cup down slowly, fixing her with a steady gaze. Even if what he says doesn't always match the truth, her body stiffened. She turned toward me fully now, her eyes narrowing slightly. What are you implying? I softened my tone, reaching out to touch her arm. Nothing, dear. Only that sometimes people can say they're helping when really they're serving themselves. She pulled away gently, shaking her head. You're overthinking again. Daniel isn't like that. I let out a small sigh as though conceding. But inside, her defensiveness troubled me. She wasn't just oblivious, she was protecting him. Later that evening, I decided to probe further. We were in the living room, Julia curled on the sofa with a book, while Daniel sat across the room scrolling on his phone. I pretended to busy myself with knitting, though my eyes remained sharp above the needles. Julia, I said, my voice carrying just enough for Daniel to hear too. I was thinking about updating my will. Maybe I should speak with someone about who handles my estate. Her head jerked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Daniel looked up too, though he quickly masked his reaction with a neutral expression. "Mom, why are you even thinking about that?" Julia asked. I shrugged, my needles clicking softly. "It's practical. I'm not young anymore. Better to have things in order." Julia set her book aside, concern etched on her face. "Well, Daniel could help with that. He's good with paperwork." I glanced at him, then watching his eyes gleam with restrained eagerness. He didn't speak, but I saw the hunger there. "No," I said calmly, returning my gaze to my knitting. "I think I'd prefer a lawyer. Someone neutral." The silence that followed was telling. Julia shifted uncomfortably, and Daniel's jaw tightened ever so slightly. I knew then that my suspicion was correct. Julia wasn't blind. She was aware, at least on some level, of Daniel's ambitions. And yet, she chose to defend him. That realization cut deeper than I expected. Betrayal by a son-in-law was one thing. Betrayal or denial by my own daughter was another. That night I lay awake long after the house had gone quiet. My mind spun in circles. Could Julia truly believe Daniel's lies? Or was she so desperate to preserve the illusion of a happy marriage that she refused to see what was in front of her? The thought of losing her loyalty pierced me more sharply than any theft. Money could be recovered, accounts could be corrected, but the bond between mother and daughter, once broken, was far harder to mend. Still, I couldn't allow sentiment to weaken me. If Julia chose to side with him, I would have to face that pain. Better to endure the heartbreak of truth than to live under the weight of deceit. The next morning, as Daniel prepared to leave for work, I decided to test him directly. "Daniel." I called softly from the doorway. He turned, adjusting his tie. "Yes. Margaret, Julia tells me you're very good with paperwork." I said, my tone light. "You must be very skilled at signatures." His eyes flickered, his smile tightening. "I manage." I let the pause hang between us, then added, "I hope you never forget that some signatures carry heavy consequences." His expression faltered just for a moment. Then he forced a chuckle. "You do have a way with words, Margaret." "Yes," I murmured, watching him closely. "I always have." When he left, I stood at the window watching his car disappear down the street. My hand trembled slightly, but my resolve did not. Daniel thought he was tightening the net around me. What he didn't realize was that I was weaving one of my own, stronger, sharper, and far more dangerous. And soon enough, he would be the one caught inside it. The next time I stepped into the bank, I no longer felt like a retiree running errands. I felt like a detective walking into the heart of a crime scene. Every detail mattered: the quiet shuffle of papers, the nervous glance of a teller, the way conversations hushed as people leaned in to speak privately. I asked to see the branch manager again. He welcomed me into his office, closing the door behind us. His face was serious but kind. "Mrs. Collins," he said gently, "I was hoping you would return. I need copies." I told him firmly of every transaction tied to my account for the past 6 months, and if possible, copies of the signatures attached to them. He nodded without hesitation. "Of course. We've already flagged suspicious activity." As he slid a thick folder across the desk, my hands trembled slightly. Inside were photocopied checks and withdrawal slips, all bearing a scrawled attempt at my name. The loops of the M, the crooked C, none of it was mine. Daniel's hand was there, clumsy yet confident, attempting to replicate me. My throat tightened. Each forged line wasn't just ink on paper, it was an assault on my dignity. How much, I asked. The manager folded his hands. Several thousand in total, taken in smaller increments to avoid notice. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling. Years of savings money I had tucked away carefully, little by little, slipping into Daniel's pocket like water through a sieve. When I opened my eyes again, I felt sharper, colder. "Can you give me copies of these records?" "Yes." "And Mrs. Collins?" "If you'd like, we can freeze the account. Require your physical presence for all withdrawals." A slow smile spread across my lips. Yes, do that. Walking out of the bank with the folder pressed against my chest, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and triumph. Sorrow for what I had lost, for the trust that had been shattered. Triumph, because now I held proof. Daniel's lies would not survive daylight. At home, I hid the folder inside a locked drawer in my study. I didn't dare leave it where Julia or Daniel might stumble upon it. Evidence is a delicate thing, too fragile to flaunt, too precious to lose. That evening at dinner, I studied Daniel more closely than ever. He carried himself with the ease of a man who believed his plan was still invisible. His hand rested casually on Julia's, his laughter filling the room, his words coded in charm. But I knew now, and the knowledge gave me power. After dinner, Julia and I sat together in the living room. She leaned against the armrest of the sofa, scrolling through her phone. I took the opportunity to test her once more. "Julia," I said softly, "do you ever worry about money, about Daniel's spending?" She looked up, frowning. "No." Why, I shrugged. "I've noticed little things. New gadgets, expensive shoes. He doesn't strike me as frugal." Her eyes narrowed. "Mom, are you saying Daniel's irresponsible?" I gave her a faint smile. "I'm saying appearances can be deceiving." Her defensiveness returned instantly. "Daniel works hard. He deserves nice things." I nodded, letting the matter drop. But the ache in my chest grew heavier. Her loyalty to him was ironclad. Breaking through it would not be easy. Later that night, as the house grew quiet, I unlocked the drawer and spread the forged slips across my desk. My lamp cast a harsh yellow glow over them, illuminating every crooked letter, every false attempt at my name. I whispered to the papers as though Daniel could hear me, "You've written your own downfall," because I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was laying the foundation for a trap. I pictured it clearly, the moment in the bank when I would stand before him, documents in hand, forcing him to face the truth in front of witnesses. He would try to deny it, of course, but the proof would be undeniable. And Julia, she would have to choose between the man she thought she loved and the mother who had never betrayed her. The thought made my chest ache, but my resolve did not waver. The next morning, I tucked the folder into a briefcase and carried it with me to a lawyer's office. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman with gray streaks in her hair, listened carefully as I laid out the situation. "Forgery," she said, tapping one of the slips. "Fraud. Elder financial abuse, technically. If you want to pursue charges, you have a case." "Not yet," I said. "I don't want the police involved. Not until Julia knows." The attorney nodded slowly. "Then you'll need a controlled confrontation. Somewhere, public somewhere with witnesses. Somewhere he can't twist the narrative." I felt a grim smile touch my lips. The bank. Walking home, the plan solidified in my mind. I would not strike in anger. I would strike in precision. Daniel thought he had built a cage around me, painting me as weak, unfit, confused. But soon he would learn that the cage wasn't mine. It was his. And I held the key. The days that followed felt like I was carrying a secret weight pressed against my chest. I went about my routines, watering the garden, tidying the kitchen, answering Julia's casual questions, but beneath it all the folder of evidence remained hidden, humming like a live wire in my drawer. Every forged signature, every withdrawal slip stared back at me whenever I opened it. I spent hours late into the night reviewing the statements, tracing the patterns. Daniel hadn't been greedy at once. No, he was clever, meticulous. He took small amounts spread across different dates, never enough to trigger suspicion at first glance. But over time, it added up. Thousands of dollars gone. I pressed my palms against the papers, my throat tightening. Each dollar represented sacrifices, years of waking at dawn, long nights marking exams, putting my daughter through school. I had never lived lavishly. I had saved diligently, carefully. And now my own son-in-law had treated that labor as his personal ATM. The betrayal burned hotter with each passing day. One afternoon, I decided to look deeper. I called the bank and requested a more detailed report, not just the withdrawals, but also the exact times and teller stations where they were processed. When I spread the report out on my desk, something caught my eye. The withdrawals lined up almost perfectly with Julia's work schedule. Times when she wouldn't have been home. Times when Daniel could move freely without her questioning where he was. A cold thought crept in. Did she truly not know, or did she turn a blind eye? That evening, I sat at the dinner table pushing food around my plate while Julia chatted about her day. Daniel leaned back in his chair as confident as ever, his laughter filling the room. "Mom, you hardly ate," Julia said, her voice tinged with concern. "I'm fine," I murmured. Daniel smirked, his eyes locking onto mine for a fraction of a second, as if he knew the reason my appetite had vanished. That smug little flicker almost broke my composure, but I steadied myself. Later, as I helped Julia wash dishes, I decided to push again. "Julia," I said softly, "have you noticed any changes in your finances with Daniel?" She glanced at me, frowning. "What do you mean? He seems to spend a lot. New shoes, gadgets, nights out. Doesn't that worry you?" Her grip on the plate tightened. "Daniel works hard. He deserves to enjoy himself. But does he ever mention where the money comes from?" I pressed. Her face flushed. "Mom, stop. You're making it sound like he's stealing." The word hung in the air, stealing. Julia's defensiveness was immediate but not entirely convincing. Her voice trembled slightly. I wanted to shake her, to scream, "Open your eyes," but instead I swallowed the ache and nodded. "I just worry about you, darling. That's all." That night, alone in my room, I cried quietly into my pillow. Not for the money, not even for myself, but for Julia. My daughter, my flesh and blood, trapped between love and loyalty, unable or unwilling to see the man she had tied her life to. But my tears hardened into resolve. If Julia would not face the truth willingly, then I would bring it to her doorstep with undeniable clarity. The next morning, I returned to the bank once more. I met with the teller who had first resisted Daniel's lies. She leaned closer, her voice hushed. "Mrs. Collins, I shouldn't say this, but there were times when your son-in-law became very insistent. He claimed you were in the hospital, that you were confused and needed his help." "In the hospital," I repeated, my chest tightening. She nodded gravely. "He even tried to bring in papers once. They weren't legal documents, just handwritten notes. We rejected them, of course, but—" She trailed off. I clenched my fists. So he had spun tales of me being hospitalized, incompetent, all while I was living in the same house, cooking, walking, laughing. The audacity, the cruelty. I left the bank trembling, but more determined than ever. Daniel wasn't just stealing my money. He was trying to erase my identity, planting the idea that I was unstable, unfit, perhaps even senile. And if he succeeded, it wouldn't just be money lost. It would be my voice, my autonomy, my ability to live as myself. That night, as Daniel sat watching television, I stood in the doorway studying him. His face was relaxed, bathed in the glow of the screen, completely unaware of the storm gathering behind my eyes. Julia walked past me, smiling faintly as she sat beside him. She slipped her hand into his trusting blind. I pressed my lips together. I couldn't tell her yet. Not until the trap was ready. But when I finally laid the truth before her, there would be no room for denial. Because Daniel wasn't just nibbling at the edges of my life anymore. He was trying to consume it whole. And I would not allow it. There is a kind of silence that fills a house when you stop trusting the people who live in it. It's not the peaceful quiet of early morning or the stillness of night. It's heavier, oppressive, a silence that presses on your chest, reminding you that you are surrounded not by family, but by potential enemies. That was how I felt now. Every word Julia spoke, every step Daniel took seemed colored by deceit. I could not tell where his lies ended and where her loyalty began. At breakfast, Julia smiled across the table, chatting about a new project at work. Daniel sat beside her, sipping his coffee, his eyes glancing at me now and then. It was subtle, a flicker of amusement, of challenge. As if he knew I was unraveling his web but dared me to say it aloud. I kept my voice calm. Julia, do you remember when you were little? How I used to remind you to double-check everything. Your homework, your chores, your decisions. She chuckled lightly. Of course, Mom. You never let me get away with cutting corners. I smiled faintly. That lesson still matters. Trust, but verify. Always verify. Daniel shifted in his chair. He set down his cup with deliberate slowness, his smirk curving just enough for me to notice. Julia looked between us, puzzled. What are you talking about? Nothing, darling, I said softly. Just a mother's advice. But inside my heart was breaking. Julia's laughter, her trust, all of it now seemed built on sand. Did she truly not see? Or worse, did she see and choose to ignore it? That night alone in my room, I sat with the folder spread out on my bed. Each paper felt like a dagger. Forged signatures, false notes, stolen sums, proof of betrayal. I traced my finger over one slip in particular, the jagged loop of the M that was supposed to be mine. My voice cracked as I whispered into the empty room. Julia, how can you not see this? How can you defend him? Tears blurred the ink before me, not for the money, but for my daughter. I had raised her to be strong, to be discerning, to value truth. And yet here she was, bound to a man who spun lies around us both. For a fleeting moment, I considered burning the papers, locking the truth away forever. Maybe it was better to let it lie to protect Julia's illusion of happiness. But then I remembered Daniel's voice at the bank, smooth and confident as he told the teller, "She's not well. She forgets things. She won't notice." And my sorrow hardened into rage. If I stayed silent, he would succeed. He would strip me of my dignity, and Julia would inherit a lie. No, silence was no longer an option. I began planning the confrontation carefully. It couldn't happen at home, Daniel would twist my words. Gaslight. Julia turned the whole thing into a battle of he said, she said. No, it needed to be public, undeniable. The bank. That was the stage. I pictured it clearly, Daniel standing there weaving his story again, only for me to step forward, calm and precise, with documents in hand. Witnesses watching. Julia beside him, forced to see. It would wound her, yes. But better a wound from truth than a lifetime of blindness. The following evening, Julia found me in the living room, staring into the quiet hum of the fireplace. She sat beside me, taking my hand gently. "Mom," she said softly, "I feel like you've been distant. Are you upset with Daniel?" The question twisted like a knife. Her eyes were so sincere, so searching. I squeezed her hand, my voice trembling. "Julia, if someone betrayed you, if someone took what was yours and lied about it, would you want to know?" She frowned, confused. "Of course. But what does that have to do with, would you still love them?" I asked, cutting her off gently. Her breath caught. She stared at me, speechless. Then slowly she shook her head. "I don't know." Her words lingered in the air between us, fragile and devastating. I pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly, fighting the tears stinging my eyes. She didn't know. She wasn't ready. But soon she would have no choice. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered to the darkness, "How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone? The trap had to be perfect." A single misstep and Daniel would twist the narrative, painting me as paranoid, confused, or even vindictive. I had seen the way his charm worked on people: smooth words, confident posture, that calculated half smile. If I confronted him in private, Julia would side with him. If I confronted him at home, he would drown my truth in his lies. But at the bank? The bank was different. There would be witnesses' records and a stage he had already chosen for his deception. So I prepared, carefully. I tucked the folder of forged slips and statements into my handbag, locking it with a clasp, as though sealing my resolve. My lawyer's voice echoed in my mind, controlled confrontation: somewhere he cannot twist your words. That morning, I invited Daniel to accompany me to the bank. I told him I needed help with some confusing paperwork. His eyes lit up instantly, though he tried to mask it with a casual shrug. "Of course, Margaret," he said smoothly. "Happy to help." Julia smiled, relieved. "See, Mom, isn't it wonderful to have him around?" I forced a nod, my lips curving into a faint smile. "Yes, wonderful." Inside, my pulse pounded. The walk to the bank felt endless. Daniel made small talk, his tone light, his confidence radiating from every step. He thought he had already won. As we entered the bank, he immediately took charge, striding toward the teller's desk with his usual self-assured air. I stayed a pace behind, watching. The teller, the same young woman with glasses who had once resisted him, looked up and froze when she recognized us both. "Good morning," Daniel said warmly. "I'm here on behalf of my mother-in-law. She's been a little unwell lately, forgetful, you know how it is at her age. I'll just handle a few things for her today." The words sliced through me like glass. He spoke them so easily, as though rehearsed 100 times. But today, I would not stay silent. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "No, Daniel. You won't." His head snapped toward me, shock flickering across his face before he masked it with a laugh. "Margaret, don't make a scene." I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it firmly on the counter. "A scene?" I asked, my voice rising just enough for others in the bank to turn and watch. "This isn't a scene. This is the truth." The teller's eyes widened as I spread out the papers, the forged withdrawal slips, the mismatched signatures. "These are not mine. These are yours," I said coldly, my finger tapping the jagged loops of my falsified name. Daniel's mask cracked, his jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "This is ridiculous." "She's confused, am I?" I cut him off sharply. "Am I so confused that I walked in here and heard you telling the teller I was unwell? Am I so confused that I recognized your handwriting? Or am I just sharp enough to see through you?" Murmurs rippled through the small crowd of customers nearby. The teller glanced nervously at her supervisor, who had stepped closer, listening intently. Daniel's voice grew louder, defensive. "This is slander. She's paranoid. She doesn't know what she's talking about." "Paranoid," I snapped, my voice ringing with steel. "Then explain these documents. Explain the money missing from my account. Explain why you told strangers I was in the hospital when I was at home cooking dinner." His face flushed red, his charm stripped away. He sputtered, glancing around at the watching eyes, realizing his stage had turned against him. The bank manager approached, his expression grave. "Mr. Daniels," he said firmly, "we've documented these attempts before. I suggest you stop talking." Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I turned to the teller, my voice calmer now. "From this moment on, no transactions go through without me present. No exceptions." "Do you understand?" "Yes, Mrs. Collins," she said, quickly nodding. I gathered the papers, slowly slipping them back into the folder. Then I faced Daniel, fully holding his gaze. "You wanted everyone to believe I was weak, Daniel. But look around you. Who looks weak now?" His face twisted, a mixture of rage and humiliation. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the door, the weight of whispers following him out. The silence he left behind was thick, broken only by the hushed voices of onlookers. The teller gave me a faint, supportive smile. The manager offered a nod of respect. I stood taller than I had in months, my chest rising with a deep breath of triumph. The trap had sprung. Daniel's lies had shattered under the weight of truth. But as I walked home that day, my triumph was tempered by a deeper ache. Because while I had defeated him publicly, the hardest confrontation still remained. Julia How would she react when she saw the man she loved stripped bare? Would she hate him, or would she hate me for revealing it? The folder in my bag felt heavier with each step. Not just papers now, but the burden of proof that would change everything. I whispered to myself, steadying my resolve. Better a broken heart from truth than a lifetime bound to lies. When I stepped back into the house that afternoon, the quiet was unbearable. My handbag still hung heavy from my shoulder, the folder inside pressing like a weight against my ribs. Proof, evidence, truth. But truth, I reminded myself, is never light. It carries consequences. I set the bag down on the hallway table, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Julia's voice floated from the living room, cheerful, oblivious. For a moment, I considered retreating to my room, letting my nerves settle before speaking. But hesitation was what had given Daniel space to weave his lies. I could not hesitate now. Julia. I called, my voice steady but sharp. She appeared in the doorway, a dish towel in her hand. Mom, you're back early. Did everything go okay at the bank? Her words, so casual, sliced into me. She had no idea what had just unfolded: the trap, the humiliation Daniel had suffered in front of strangers, the collapse of his facade. Yes, I said slowly. Everything went exactly as it should. She tilted her head, sensing something beneath my tone. What do you mean? I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my handbag, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the coffee table in the living room. Sit down, I said firmly. Her brow furrowed. Mom. Sit. She obeyed, confusion clouding her eyes. I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap. Julia, I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to show you will change how you see your husband. Her face paled. Daniel? What? What are you talking about? I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Withdrawal slips, account statements, photocopied checks with forged signatures. She leaned forward, scanning them quickly, her lips parting in disbelief. What is this evidence? I said, my voice trembling but strong. Evidence that Daniel has been stealing from me, forging my name, lying to the bank, and lying to you. Her head shook violently. No. No, that's not possible. He wouldn't. Julia? I interrupted, my voice sharp now, cutting through her denial. I heard him myself. At the bank. He told the teller I was unwell, that I was losing my memory, that I needed him to handle my money. He has been trying to strip me of my independence while draining my savings right under our noses. She stared at the papers again, her hands trembling as she picked up one slip. Her eyes darted over the shaky scrawl of my name. This isn't your handwriting. No, I said coldly. It's his. His clumsy attempt to be me. Tears welled in her eyes as she dropped the paper back onto the pile. No. No, Daniel wouldn't do this. He takes care of us. He does. I leaned forward, my voice rising. Or has he been taking care of himself, feeding his greed with my life's work, my savings, my dignity? Her breath came in shallow gasps. She pressed her palms against her temples, shaking her head as if to shake away the truth. I confronted him today. I continued, my voice firm. At the bank. In front of the tellers, the managers, strangers who heard every word. He tried to lie to call me paranoid, but the proof was undeniable. He left humiliated. Her eyes widened, glistening with tears. You humiliated him. The question stabbed me, but I steadied myself. No, Julia. He humiliated himself. By choosing lies, by choosing theft. I only revealed what was already there. She rose abruptly, pacing the room, her hands trembling. I can't believe this. Daniel loves me. He loves you. He's always said he wanted to protect us. I stood slowly, my voice softer now. Protect us. He has been poisoning us. He made the bank believe I was sick, Julia. Do you understand what that means? If he succeeded, I would have been declared incompetent. He would have had control over everything. Not just my money, my choices, my freedom, my life. Her knees buckled and she sank back onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. Oh my God. I sat beside her, placing a hand on her trembling one. I know this is hard to hear, but you need to see him for who he truly is. Not the man he pretends to be, but the man who tried to destroy your own mother for money. The front door slammed open. Daniel. He strode into the living room, his face red, his jaw tight. His eyes flicked to the papers on the table, then to Julia's tear-streaked face. Margaret. He growled, his voice low and dangerous. What have you done? I rose slowly, standing between him and Julia. I told her the truth. He sneered, stepping closer. You think a few papers prove anything? She's confused, Julia. She's turning against me because she's jealous of how much you trust me. Jealous? I snapped, my voice sharp. Jealous of what? Of a thief. Of a liar. Julia's eyes darted between us, torn broken. Daniel turned to her, his voice softening, instantly dripping with false tenderness. Sweetheart, listen to me. She's not well. She's been saying things, imagining things. You know how it is with age. Please don't let her poison you against me. I stepped forward, thrusting the forged slips into Julia's hands. Look at them. Look at the handwriting. Look at the dates. Look at the money missing. This isn't imagination, Julia. This is fact. Daniel's mask cracked again, rage flashing in his eyes. You've gone too far, Margaret. No, I said, my voice steady. You have. And now your lies are over. Julia's hands shook as she stared at the papers. Her tears fell onto the ink, smudging the evidence but not erasing it. Slowly, she looked up at him, her voice breaking. Daniel, tell me this isn't true. He opened his mouth but no words came. His silence was louder than any confession. Julia's sob filled the room, raw and painful. She dropped the papers onto the floor and buried her face in her hands. I stood tall, my chest rising with each heavy breath. Daniel glared at me, his fury palpable, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, the truth stood in the open, undeniable, unshakable. And now, Julia had to choose. The living room felt like the center of an earthquake. Julia sat crumpled on the sofa, her face buried in her hands, the papers scattered across the carpet like shattered glass. Daniel loomed near the doorway. His fists clenched, his face twisted in rage, and I stood between them, my body shaking but my spine unbroken. Julia, I said softly, look at him. Listen to his silence. A guilty man always reveals himself even without words. She lifted her head slowly, her cheeks streaked with tears. Her eyes, usually so bright, looked hollow. She turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. Tell me it's not true. Please. Tell me Mom is lying. Daniel stepped forward, his tone suddenly gentle, dripping with a false sweetness. Sweetheart, you know I'd never hurt you or your family. This is her imagination. She's twisting things to make me look bad. I cut him off sharply. Twisting things? I confronted you at the bank today. In front of the manager, the teller's strangers who all heard you claim I was unwell. Do you deny that? His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Julia's gaze flickered between us, her hands tightening around the crumpled papers in her lap. Daniel, why would she lie about something like this? Why would my mother fabricate evidence? His mask slipped again, his voice rising with frustration. Because she doesn't like me? She never has. She resents the fact that you chose me, that you trust me. She can't stand losing control. I stepped closer, my voice icy. Control. You mean the way you forged my signature, the way you drained my savings little by little. You didn't want control, Daniel. You wanted ownership. The word landed heavy in the air. Julia flinched as though struck. Daniel's fury boiled over. He slammed his fist against the wall, the sound reverberating through the room. Enough, I won't stand here and be accused in my own home. This is my home, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. And you've been trespassing on more than walls. You trespassed on trust, on dignity, on family. That ends today. Julia's sobs filled the silence. She pressed her hands against her face, shaking her head. I don't know what to believe. I knelt beside her, gently prying her hands away. Believe the evidence, Julia. Believe your instincts. Deep down, you've seen it too. The arrogance, the secrecy, the spending. Haven't you wondered where the money comes from? Haven't you felt that unease in your gut? Her lips trembled. Slowly she nodded. Sometimes. Yes. Daniel spun toward her, his voice sharp with desperation. Julia, don't let her manipulate you. I've given you everything. Who do you think pays for this house, for your comfort, for paid? With what I snapped. With my money. With lies. He froze, his face darkening. Julia's breath came in ragged gasps. She looked at him with wide, searching eyes. Daniel, is it true? The silence stretched. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked away. That was all the answer she needed. Her shoulders sagged as though the weight of the world had just collapsed upon them. She covered her face again, sobbing harder. I stood, my voice low, but firm. You see, Julia, he can't even deny it now. Daniel whirled on me, his eyes blazing with hatred. You've ruined everything. No, I said coldly. You ruined everything the moment you chose greed over family. For a moment I thought he might strike me. His fists curled tighter, his body rigid with rage. But then he turned abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. Julia's muffled voice broke through her sobs. Get out. Daniel stopped in his tracks, whipping around. What? She lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice trembling but fierce. Get out, Daniel. I can't even look at you right now. He laughed bitterly. You're going to throw me out because of her, after everything I've done for you. What you've done for me, she shouted, her voice cracking. You stole from my mother. You lied about her health. Tried to make her seem crazy so you could control her. Do you realize what you've done? Her words rang out sharp and raw. Daniel staggered slightly, his confidence faltering under the weight of her fury. But his arrogance returned quickly. Fine, he spat. I'll leave. But don't think this is over. You'll regret taking her side. He stormed toward the door, grabbing his coat. Before leaving, he turned to me, his eyes narrowing. This isn't the end, Margaret. You'll regret crossing me. The door slammed behind him, the echo rattling through the walls. The house fell silent again, but it was a different silence, jagged, broken. Julia collapsed onto the sofa, her body shaking with sobs. I sat beside her, wrapping my arms around her trembling frame. I'm so sorry, Mom. She whispered, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I stroked her hair gently, my own tears brimming. You wanted to believe in love. There's no shame in that. But now you see him clearly. That's what matters. She pulled back slightly, her eyes swollen and red. What do we do now? We protect ourselves, I said firmly. We secure the accounts. We speak to the lawyer. And we make sure he can't hurt us again. Her lip trembled. Do you think he'll try? I glanced toward the door where Daniel had disappeared into the night. A chill ran through me, but I didn't let her see it. He's already lost Julia. The moment the truth came out, he lost. Now it's just a matter of ensuring he can't drag us down with him. We sat there for a long while, holding each other, the weight of betrayal heavy but shared. And in that moment, I realized something: profound pain, when divided, becomes lighter. The burden I had carried alone for weeks was now shared with Julia. She was no longer blind. She was awake. And though the road ahead would not be easy, we would walk it together. The days after Daniel stormed out blurred into one another, but they carried a strange mix of relief and heaviness. Relief that the lies were exposed, that I no longer had to pretend ignorance. Heavier still was the knowledge that my daughter's heart had been cracked wide open. I found Julia at the kitchen table each morning, her eyes swollen from a night of restless crying. She tried to hide it, smoothing her hair, applying a bit of makeup, but the grief still clung to her shoulders like a heavy cloak. I knew that look. I had worn it myself once years ago after my own husband had left me for someone else. Betrayal always leaves the same mark, whether it comes from a spouse or a child, a sibling or a son-in-law. One morning, as she pushed her untouched breakfast around her plate, she whispered, "I don't know how to start again, Mom. I don't know who I am without him." I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "You are Julia. You are my daughter. You are stronger than you think. You survived before him, and you will survive after him. Sometimes we have to lose what we thought we couldn't live without to discover we were whole all along." Her eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded. We spent the next week in quiet action. Together we visited my lawyer, who explained the steps we would take to ensure Daniel couldn't access my accounts again. Fraud reports were filed, protective measures set. My dignity was no longer a question to strangers at the bank. It was defended, documented, secure. Julia insisted on being by my side for every meeting. Perhaps it was guilt for not seeing through him earlier, or perhaps it was the bond of trust beginning to mend between us. Either way, her presence steadied me. Daniel tried to call her twice. Both times she rejected the call. The third time she blocked his number. I didn't tell her, but pride swelled in my chest at her strength. One night she sat with me in the living room, the glow of the lamp softening her face. "Do you think people can change?" she asked quietly. I thought about it for a long moment. Yes, but only if they want to. And Daniel doesn't want to. He doesn't see what he did as wrong. To him it was clever. To him I was just an obstacle. Her lips pressed together, trembling. And I was just a tool. I squeezed her hand gently. "Not anymore. Now you're free to see clearly. And once you see, you can't unsee." We sat in silence, listening to the faint chirp of crickets outside. It struck me then how life could continue so normally even when our world felt like it had been shattered. The universe doesn't pause for our grief. It teaches us to carry it. As the weeks stretched on, Daniel's absence became less of a wound and more of a scar. Julia began to stand taller, her laughter returning in small bursts. I found myself sleeping better at night, no longer haunted by the fear of losing my independence. And yet, sometimes, in the quiet moments, I would hear his voice echoing in my head. "She's not well. She forgets things. She won't notice." That was what enraged me most. Not the stolen money, not even the betrayal itself, but the attempt to erase me, to make me invisible, to convince the world I was fading before I had truly begun to dim. I thought of all the women I had known, colleagues, friends, neighbors who had faced the same thing in different forms, who had been told they were too old, too weak, too confused, who had been dismissed, silenced, taken advantage of. And I made a promise to myself that day: I would not let anyone, not Daniel, not anyone else, decide when I had lost my worth. One evening, Julia joined me on the porch, the sun dipping low behind the trees. She leaned against the railing, sipping tea, her expression thoughtful. "Mom," she said softly, "I want to thank you." I glanced at her, surprised. For what? For not giving up on me. For not letting him win. For showing me the truth even when it hurt. Tears pricked my eyes, but I smiled. That's what mothers do. We hold the truth, even when it's heavy, and we carry it until our children are ready to see it. She set down her cup and hugged me tightly. For the first time in weeks, I felt her arms not trembling with grief, but steady with love. That night, I sat at my desk, pulling out the last of the papers from the folder. I stacked them neatly, slipped them back into the envelope, and locked them away. They were no longer daggers piercing me. They were shields, proof that I had survived, that I had not been erased. As I turned off the lamp, I caught my reflection in the mirror above my desk. Lines traced my face, yes, but behind them was a woman still sharp, still standing, still alive with purpose. I whispered to myself as if to Daniel, though he was nowhere near. You tried to bury me with lies, but I am still here. And I knew then that this was not just a story of betrayal, it was a story of reclamation, of dignity regained. Because dignity isn't something someone else can give or take. It lives in the quiet refusal to be silenced, in the courage to speak truth, even when it shakes, in the love that binds a mother and daughter stronger than deceit. Slow, emotional fade out. I don't know what became of Daniel after that night. Perhaps he moved on to someone else to deceive. Perhaps he still whispers lies to anyone who will listen. But his shadow no longer darkens my doorway. What I do know is that Julia and I began again. We rebuilt trust slowly, brick by brick, honesty by honesty. The scar of betrayal will always be there, but scars are proof of healing, not just hurt. And me, I walk a little taller now. I smile when I go to the bank, knowing they no longer see me as fragile, but as resilient. I spend my mornings on the porch with my coffee, the birds singing, the sun rising, and I feel whole. Family should be where love resides, where loyalty is unquestioned. But when betrayal seeps in, you can either let it drown you or use it as the fire to rise. I chose to rise. And if you are listening to this story now, know this: you are never too old, too quiet, or too small to reclaim your truth. Because the moment you decide you will not be erased, the world is forced to remember you. So tell me, have you ever faced a betrayal like this? What would you have done in my place? Share your story with us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth for more stories of survival, betrayal, and the quiet, powerful victories we carve for ourselves.